Within that, we've broken down everything from regulatory reforms to over here the adoption of technology to doing things better, faster, cheaper. The one fragility, and we seem to agree with our Democrat colleagues very much on this, is population and skill sets within the economy. As you all know, I think preliminary numbers from census have us last year growing only about 400,000 population. This year, we're pretty close to zero population growth as a society. Today, we functionally have the same number of 18-year-olds as we had 20 years ago, but double those who are 65 and up. We have to deal with the reality of a fairly flat population growth, and many of those who are most productive, most skills, are moving into their retirement years. What does a future immigration, population, talent type system look like? And it's something on a personal level we've been working with our economists for over a year now, trying to come up with what maximizes economic vitality and growth in a time where fertility rates are functioning. I think census has us at, 1.59 was our estimates for last year. We have to deal with the reality of United States demographics. And it's often like dancing on a minefield because of the misrepresentation and how many things are just not true about U.S. demographics. So I'm elated to have you here. I've only had minutes to read over some of your testimonies. Some of the things you've done are brilliant. I cannot wait to play with the app and start to look at the economics that happen with certain population growths. So can I do, I'm actually going to have Senator Hansen do her opening, then we're going to introduce the witnesses, then we're going to actually listen. Senator?
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you, Chairman Schweikert, for calling today's hearing on a really important topic. And I also want to thank your staff for their work on this hearing. Thank you to the witnesses as well for testifying before the committee and sharing your expertise on a really important topic. For generations, the United States has been a top destination for talented students, researchers, and scientists from around the world. Our unparalleled universities and industries have created hubs that allow great minds to come to our country, work with American partners, and together produce groundbreaking research. This innovation ecosystem has led to life-saving cures for diseases, to new technologies that drive the United States' productivity and support our national security, and to new businesses that employ millions of Americans right here at home. But the current administration has put this system, one of our greatest assets, in jeopardy. Through its attacks on research and universities, combined with reckless and arbitrary immigration policies, the Trump administration has made it harder for the United States to attract and retain international talent. Our competitors have taken note. In the past year, China launched a new visa to attract university graduates in science, technology, engineering, and math who may have otherwise come to the United States. By creating fear and disorder in our system of legal immigration, as well as at our universities, this administration will cause the United States to lose out on the next generation of international collaborators and to fall behind our competitors. I will continue to stand up for our world-class universities and centers for scientific research, and I continue to press for immediate changes to ICE's assaults on public safety and civil rights. Regardless of who is president, it has long been clear that we need to fix our broken immigration system, and I'm really glad that we have come together today to discuss meaningful, common-sense changes to improve it, and I look forward to the conversation. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. As I have teased in many ways, the 80s, 90s were a world battle for hydrocarbons. Last decade, in many ways, it was a battle for rare earths. If you actually look at what many of our trading partners, the industrialized nations, we're in a time where they've changed their immigration codes to attract talent. Is it time the United States basically showed up in the great talent battle for the world. So let's introduce our witnesses. Dr. Luke Perdue, a policy director at the Aspen Institute and Economic Strategy Group here in Washington. Mr. Daniel DiMartino, fellow Manhattan Institute. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, who actually I'd like to consider one of my favorite people, American Action Forum. And I'm going to let you introduce yours.
Sure, and I am pleased to introduce Mr. Jeremy Neufeld, Director of Immigration Policy at the Institute for Progress. Mr. Neufeld is an expert in immigration policy for individuals with specialized skills and has written extensively on the topic. Prior to his current role, he served as an immigration policy analyst at the Niskanen Center. Welcome, Mr. Neufeld. I really look forward to your testimony.
Okay. Doctor, 5 minutes.
Chairman Schweikert, Ranking Member Hassan, and other members of the Joint Economic Committee, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. I am the Policy Director of the Aspen Economic Strategy Group, which is a group devoted to advancing bipartisan, evidence-based solutions to America's most pressing economic challenges, many of which we'll touch on today. The U.S. is experiencing a consequential demographic transition marked by the dual trends of rising life expectancy and a declining birth rate. First, and simply put, Americans are having fewer kids. U.S. birth rates began to drop in 2007, and the TFR reached a historic low of 1.6 births per woman, well below the 2.1 level needed to keep our population stable over time. Meanwhile, average lifespans have increased. A person born in the U.S. in 1960 was expected to live to 70 years old, and by 2023, average life expectancies have risen to 78 years. As a result, America faces prospects of a slower growing, eventually shrinking, and older population. Even today, nearly 1 in 5 people in America is age 65 or older. I'd like to focus my remarks on the economic challenges presented by these demographic shifts and how we might address them. So first, the aging of the population is driving the rising federal debt, and in turn, it's reducing our capacity to invest in other productive uses. Second, these shifts have reduced America's economic dynamism and diminished the labor market prospects for younger workers. Finally, and on an optimistic note, there are policy solutions to the economic challenges presented by these shifts, such as attracting high-skilled talent from around the world, more effectively investing in our domestic workforce, and making it easier for those who want to have more kids. So on my first point, the aging of the baby boom generation into retirement has created a growing imbalance between our spending on entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare and the revenue that we need to meet those obligations. And my own research has found that the continued aging of the population is driving all of the rise in the nation's primary budget deficit. So rising debt and deficits can reduce our fiscal space to support other domestic needs, including spending on future generations. So in 2019, the federal government, for every dollar the federal government spent on children, it spent $5 on elderly Americans. Starting in 2023, the federal government spends more on interest payments on the federal debt than we spend on our children. On my second point, these shifts have also contributed to reduced American economic dynamism. The U.S. has among the most entrepreneurial and dynamic economies in the world, yet we've been seeing dramatically falling rates of dynamism in recent years. For instance, the startup rate over the past 40 years has fallen by 29%. And research has shown that the demographic shifts I described can account for a third of this startup deficit. Additionally, as older workers live longer and remain in high-paying jobs, younger workers face fewer opportunities to move up the career ladder. Undoubtedly, it's a good thing that Americans are living longer, but it also means that the flatter career trajectories younger workers experience make it more difficult for them to make key early life investments like buying a home, investing in education, and yes, starting a family. Again, absent policy action, these trends paint a picture of America moving through the rest of the century with an older and a slower growing population, where spending on the elderly consumes an ever greater share of public resources, and where younger workers face fewer opportunities and fewer opportunities to gain the skills they need to thrive. So in the rest of my time, I'd like to tell you all about how we can avoid that future. First, we can be sober-minded that having more kids today will take decades to show up in better macroeconomic outcomes, but we should still enact policies that make raising a family more affordable and accessible to young adults today. Although incremental policy changes like modest tax credits might not have large impacts on birth rates, even small changes compounded over time can result in millions more Americans. Second, as we're taking those steps, we can address these challenges by improving our ability to attract and to retain the world's brightest minds. High-skilled immigrants create productivity-raising technological innovations. They start businesses that raise business dynamism, and on net, their contributions reduce the federal deficit. In particular, today, when the connection between America's technological leadership, our economic power, and our national security has rarely been stronger, leading the global race for talent should be a policy priority. Finally, a complementary approach to those two steps that I just described is to create a more productive domestic population. We can do that first by investing in our children through spending on programs that have been proven to raise their educational attainment, their earnings, and their health in adulthood. But again, we can only do that if we have this fiscal space to make those investments. And more broadly, we must think seriously now about how to equip our country's education and our labor market institutions to give workers the flexibility and resilience to navigate a rapidly shifting economy. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Chairman Schweikert, Ranking Member Hassan, members of the JEC, it is a great honor to testify before you on what I believe is one of America's most important sources of economic prosperity, high-skilled immigration. A sound immigration policy is one that welcomes talented people to America, and it is one of the most important tools at your disposal to achieve economic growth. Today, we'll argue that shifting legal immigration towards admitting younger and more highly educated immigrants without changing the number of immigrants coming to America will help you achieve three goals. One, reduce the national debt. Two, increase economic prosperity. And three, delay population aging and decline. The main criticism of immigration often concerns its labor market impact. I would summarize the impact of highly skilled immigration on the labor market as a positive one because of the increased productivity and innovation that the entrepreneurship and the skills that these people create. I dive deeper into this topic in my written testimony. Today, I'd like to focus your attention on my chief area of research at the Manhattan Institute, which is the fiscal impact of immigrants and how high-skilled immigration can help us achieve a stable national debt. Immigrants pay taxes, but they also collect government benefits, and the difference is what we call fiscal impact. My research finds that the average new immigrant will decrease the national debt, but that fact hides heterogeneity. Immigrants who are college educated and under 60 years old drive the entire positive impact of immigration on the federal budget. A 30-year-old immigrant with a graduate degree may reduce the national debt by more than $2.5 million over 30 years. But a 30-year-old immigrant without a high school diploma will increase the national debt by $200,000. All immigrants on average over 60 years old will increase the national debt. America cannot afford to keep people out who would help us reduce the debt while welcoming those who would increase it. That is exactly what many policies seem designed to do. While only 130,000 employment-based high-skilled immigrants are allowed to come together with their spouses and children, an unlimited number, standing at around 140,000, of elder parents of U.S. citizens receive green cards. Closing the border was a positive fiscal development since my research finds that the average new illegal immigrant will cost the federal government $100,000 over 30 years. The CBO estimates that in less than 4 years, America will experience more deaths than births. Therefore, demographically, you should also favor younger immigrants. Old immigrants won't be able to have children, while many young immigrants have kids and thus help us raise birth rates. The executive branch could also improve immigration policy, first by collecting better data. New immigrants should be asked to submit their educational attainment and past annual earnings so that you can design better policy. The Trump administration is also right to strengthen the public charge rule to shift visas from low-skilled to high-skilled immigrants, something that I wrote how to better do in a policy brief. Congress may also reduce the national debt, increase birth rates and productivity by shifting visas from some categories towards employment-based and highly skilled categories. My proposal outlined in the Manhattan Institute report, The Fiscal Impact of Immigration, published this October, would reduce the national debt by $20 trillion over 30 years, reducing debt to GDP ratio by 27 percentage points, all without increasing U.S. population size. Under the newly published Manhattan Institute Immigration Calculator, something that I mentioned to the chairman, you and your staff can choose from nearly 50 different immigration policies and see their effect on GDP, population, the national debt, and everything related to that. And I am very happy to model the fiscal impact and economic impact of any immigration policy proposal you may have. Finally, America is a nation, not merely an economy. Culture and safety matter, of course. As in everything in life, every choice is a trade-off. I encourage you to choose an immigration policy that welcomes immigrants who will be net contributors to the federal treasury. I am at your disposal should you have any questions. Thank you.
Chairman Schweikert, Ranking Member Hassan, members of the committee, thank you for the privilege of being here today. Let me echo some of the things that have been said already about the benefits of more and targeted reforms to highlight skilled immigration. But there has been expressed recently a lot of concern that somehow our workers just cannot compete in the global economy. And this has led to support for policies like tariff walls, Buy American provisions, subsidies to domestic producers, and restrictions on immigration in the name of protecting the American worker. I think this line of reasoning is mistaken for several reasons. Number one, there is no broad-based, convincing body of evidence that suggests that immigration has reduced the wages of or taken the jobs of Native Americans, native-born Americans. There's been a lot of attention, for example, on the Mariel boat lift decades ago, and after really genuinely decades of torturing the data, you can find an enormous influx of low-skilled workers into a single county did hurt the prospects of a few Americans. But it takes a lot to find that. And in general, that's not what you find. What you find is that immigration raises the wages of native-born workers. They are complements, not substitutes, and that our prospects are enhanced by having those workers here. So on the facts, I think that argument, which gets trotted out all the time still, is just not supported by the data. There's also a gap in the logic of that argument. There is no reason why the workers actually have to show up in the United States to compete with our workers. They are competing already. They are competing through the global market for trade and goods and services. And the inability to compete will show up not when someone shows up across the street or across the country. It'll show up when they enter the global economy, and we need to be equipped to compete on those terms from the outset. And that brings me to the third thing that I think I am genuinely concerned about, and that is that we are not equipping our native-born workers to compete effectively. I think the most threatening thing is not immigration, it's the poor performance of the K-12 education system in the United States. Each year we get new information from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. I won't detail the numbers, they're in my written testimony, but those numbers tell a very troubling story. We are not making progress, we are backsliding. And the reality is that in America, for a decade, roughly a quarter to a third of 4th and 8th graders are seriously deficient in reading and mathematics. They will not be able to compete effectively in the global economy. We're leaving behind an enormous fraction of our future workers that could be filled by skilled immigration, and that will be one source, but is a national tragedy that we're not taking better care of the ones who are born here and deserve a better chance to compete effectively. So I'm thrilled that you're having this hearing. I want to emphasize that everything that you're going to hear about the reforms to the immigration system requires you have parallel effective controls on illegal immigration, because if you don't control illegal immigration, you don't have an immigration policy, because you cannot dictate the targets and the outcomes. So thank you for your interest in this. This has been a topic I've worked on for a long, long time, and it's nice to see people interested in pushing the ball forward.
Chairman Schweikert, Ranking Member Hassan, and members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Jeremy Neufeld. I'm the Director of Immigration Policy at the Institute for Progress. We're a nonpartisan research organization focused on innovation policy. My research in particular focuses on how the United States could be more competitive at attracting the best minds from around the world. And the central thesis of my testimony is that it's been a huge advantage to the United States that those leading minds around the world want to move here. But it's an advantage that we can't take for granted. The US is an economic, scientific, and technological powerhouse because we recruit from everywhere. We integrate the world's best engineers, entrepreneurs, and scientists into the world's best institutions and the most dynamic economy, and then we let them do what they do best. And the results speak for themselves. Immigrants are 16% of our population, but they're responsible for 32% of all US innovation. They've won 40% of our Nobels in science, and they founded more than half of our billion-dollar startups. But I think two stories could really illustrate what's at stake here more than any statistics can. The first story is about how we developed the COVID-19 vaccine under Operation Warp Speed. And that was only possible because Catalin Carrico moved here from Hungary in 1985 and then developed mRNA as a pioneer for decades at work at US universities. But if she had tried moving here just a few years later, she might have been blocked because Congress passed new restrictions on H-1Bs in 1990 and then in 1998 that would have barred her entry. And so for every success story like Carico's, I think there's also stories of lost opportunities, including how the United States lost 5G to China. So Erdal Arakan was a Turkish scientist who graduated from MIT and Caltech. And when he graduated, he tried to stay in the United States. He tried to get a green card. Instead, we kicked him out. He moved back to Turkey. He made a breakthrough on polar codes, and Huawei was able to use those to develop 5G there instead of here. Had he moved here when we had the system that let Carico in, he would be a US citizen today, and the US could be the leader in 5G. High-skilled immigration policy 3 decades ago birthed a biomedical revolution. High-skilled immigration policy today exported 5G to Shenzhen. America touts itself as the world's talent magnet, but we admit remarkably little talent on purpose. Of the 1 million or so green cards we issue each year, only 7% of them are issued on the basis of skills or jobs. And the talent recruitment pipeline that we do have is essentially an accident. It's our university system. As a National Academies chair said in 2024, the US has a talent program and it's grad school. That's because the typical pathway for a high-skilled immigrant into the United States is through the front door of international education and then onto a temporary work visa and then onto permanent residence. And that system is failing to keep the US competitive for talent in 3 different ways. The first, as we've heard a little bit about, is that the system is not selective. There's far more people who are trying to come here than there are slots available, and we don't prioritize those who are going to contribute the most to the United States or who are least likely to disadvantage American workers. The second reason is that recruitment and retention of high-skilled talent have stagnated. As I discussed more in my written testimony, growing backlogs have made it harder for us to recruit and retain top talent, and that's only been exacerbated by recent policies. 3, we're squandering the talent that are here who we have managed to recruit. Restrictive visa rules and long wait times keep them tied to their employers and locked out of the economy's most dynamic sectors. And worse still, China has noticed that US complacency about high-skilled immigration represents an opportunity for them. Beijing has moved aggressively to reverse its brain drain, and they've announced that they're trying to be competitive with the United States for global talent by 2035. Just last week, on March 12th, the 15th 5-year plan announces the creation of a new immigration system for high-skilled researchers. The US has always been the world's talent magnet, but without better policies, the next generation of top talent will have to fight an immigration system that's designed to block them. And without taking a more proactive approach to immigration, the next generation of breakthroughs might not be built here. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the courtesy. Mr. Neufeld, could you discuss ways that high-skilled immigrants have boosted innovation and job growth here in the United States for all Americans, and ways that this administration's actions have threatened our ability to attract and retain highly skilled researchers?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about that. I think the first thing to note about the immense promise of high-skilled immigration for the purpose of innovation is that it comes through 2 main channels. One is that the immigrants themselves, when we're recruiting the best, can bring incredible ideas that we can't have without them. Yeah. But the second is that they also collaborate with researchers here in ways where the combination is better than the sum of its parts. And so that statistic I cited earlier, where 32% of all US innovation since the 70s is responsible to immigrants, about 1/3 of that effect is actually from making native collaborators more productive. Right. The teams that are possible at our universities and our institutions are particularly strong because it benefits from homegrown talent and the best foreign talent. And so I think of this really as something that has immense spillovers, and we all benefit when the products that those and inventions that those high-skilled immigrants are contributing end up circulating throughout the entire economy. I think, though, that there are some very real threats that recently have been making that selection process and our ability to recruit those high-skilled immigrants far more difficult. I can talk about a few of them right now. The first is that Congress designed the H-1B program with this idea in mind that there are huge spillovers that come from the research enterprise in the United States. And because of that, they exempted universities, our national laboratories, and other nonprofit research organizations from the H-1B caps. But those have now been subjected to a $100,000 fee.
Okay.
And what that means is that all of the PhDs, many of the physicians who are going to research hospitals in the United States, the international recruitment pipeline for those people has essentially stopped. That's one policy that's already happened. Another one is that the H-1B has historically been awarded when there's more people who are trying to get them at random.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense to try to reform that system and prioritize people better. But this administration has adopted a weighted lottery rule that selects for the wrong things. It is now bringing in people who are older and who are less likely to be the young international students who are coming out of our universities. Okay. And so I think that is like a negative selection pressure. I think there's also looming over our entire international education system is the talk that optional practical training, which is the program that lets international students stay after they graduate, that could be rescinded. Okay. And that amount of uncertainty has made it very difficult for students to make decisions about coming here with the certainty that they'll be able to stay.
That's helpful. Thank you. Dr. Pardue, to follow up here on Mr. Neufeld's points, could you discuss some of the ways that students and researchers from both the United States and other countries strengthen our economy here at home, and how current policies under this administration have made it harder for students and researchers to come to the U.S. and stay here?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I would point to a few points in a few ways in which both foreign-born and native workers come together to be more productive. And I would say, first of all, that productivity effect is enormous. So, for instance, there are studies that look at the different success rates of companies that are combined, that are made up of native-born teams, mixed native-born and foreign-born teams, or just foreign-born founders. And they find that the most productive, the most successful, say after 3 years, are those teams that are made up of both foreign-born and native-born founders, what you may call, native-born and immigrant teams. After 3 years, those companies have 23% more people. So those are the exact types of synergies that we're seeing, and the fact that we see that success is a testament to the fact that immigration is more than the sum of its parts. On the second part, some of the positive effects come from the deficit. High school immigration can relieve our fiscal pressures because of these productivity effects. The Penn Wharton budget model estimated that even if we kept the total number of visas constant, but allocated 10% more to foreign-born STEM graduates, we would see a reduction in the federal deficit of $153 billion over 10 years. And finally, foreign-born students who graduate with a STEM degree, for every 100 foreign-born students that graduate, 262 jobs are created. And so that's a testament to the job creation abilities of foreign-born students. The one thing that I would point out is that for years, we have neglected our high-skill immigration system, and we've seen growing backlogs. These green card visa limits have been set in the 1990s, and I think that it has been a decades-long problem that's been growing. And so I think that the fact that there's bipartisan consensus around reform is a really positive development.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the hearing on this important topic. Business owners in my district consistently tell me they have trouble finding people to fill the spaces that they have available. This may be not all skilled immigrant, we call it, I forget the other term that we use, but this is all the way up and down the skill levels. I served in construction, or I owned a construction. I was a contractor for a long time, and that was always like the #1 issue affecting whether we could grow or not, whether we could find people. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but first I want to talk, one thing that I think about a lot here is obviously the fiscal trajectory we're on, the debt. And one of the ways that we can begin to change the trajectory, there are a number of them. You could increase revenue, you could reduce spending to lower the deficit, but you have to have strong economic growth. And in fact, I would argue that you really can't begin to change the debt problem without having strong economic growth. CBO, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, and I think I'll ask you this question. You've been, of course, a former director of CBO, but Director Schweikert tells me that one of the reasons that they are projecting what is pretty tepid growth for the next 20 or 30 years of about 1.5 to 1.6% annually per year, when our historic average has been closer to 3%. They say one of the major reasons for that is a lack of workers. Would you agree with that? Do you think having additional workers, maybe through immigration, if we aren't producing enough workers ourselves, is really important? Talk just a little bit to me about how that would affect economic growth.
Yes, I think that's absolutely correct. The demographic transformation that Dr. Pardue talked about has been forecast for a long, long time, and we've seen the transition to a higher ratio of retirees to working age Americans. We've seen on top of that an unanticipated further decline in fertility, and the result is we're simply not seeing rapid growth in the population, which translates into slow growth in the labor force. And economic growth isn't magic; it's arithmetic. It's workers and output per worker, and so it's workers and productivity. Immigration helps on both fronts, and so we can have more workers. And by choosing the skills in the workforce, you can get better productivity. And immigration has, even without trying, this is, I think, one of the points that's worth thinking about from Dr. Neufeld, is that even without trying, we've benefited enormously from the economic talents of immigrants. If we tried, if we targeted the reforms, it would make an enormous difference. So I think that's something to focus on.
Yeah. One of the things, and we could talk about that a little longer, but one of the things that I've found interesting, we've had a year of fairly high growth. Maybe Dr. Pardue asked you this question, but we've had a year of reasonably high growth. I think we ended up about 2.5% or something like that. But it seems that our job market hasn't kept up with that in the way that you would typically expect, showing potentially we're seeing some of the effects of higher productivity, potentially through AI. And so I guess I'm wondering how you would project that going forward if we're projected to be short workers. What's AI going to do to that equation? Are we going to see that much higher productivity that we won't need as much immigration as we're thinking here? Just talk to me about what that looks like.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Representative. And I think your assessment is right. We've been seeing fairly strong economic growth, but a slowing job market. And I would point to over the long term. I would point to two trends, which is that the fact that we're seeing economic growth right now, despite a slow job market, is because of the fact that productivity growth has been so strong, and that's been really keeping up economic growth despite the weak job market. And that's going to have to be the case because of these demographic challenges that I outlined. That, again, by 2030, the CBO projects that native-born population growth will turn negative.
Do you think AI will begin to solve that problem in and of itself?
You know, to be honest, I'm an optimist about AI, but I think that it will, in ways, not affect the total demand for skills, but change the types of skills that are necessary. So I think people will always be a part of the equation, and more people will always grow the pie. And so I'm optimistic that AI will raise productivity, but I think it will increase demand for workers for certain sets of skills. That means that it's not simply going to solve these problems that we have, the demographic problems we have.
Thank you. I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
Mr. Byer.
First, Chairman, thank you very much for putting this together. I really appreciate the wonderful people you have testifying, and thank all of you. I wish every member of Congress could read your 4 testimonies. And David, we should try to figure out how to make that happen.
That would require literacy.
Oh, sorry. In any case, thank you very much. I've actually, all of my team read all of them. And one of the nice parts about listening to you is it's been so disappointing to put up with the nativist, xenophobic stuff that we've gotten the last year. no ad hominem attacks, but I'm very disappointed with the leadership that Stephen Miller has taken us down the last year. And I think it's the wrong direction for our country. And I look at the cumulative economic effects of the visa processing delays, the $100,000 H-1B fee, the blanket country bans, et cetera, and think all this is moving in the wrong direction. I was fascinated, Mr. Neufeld, by your really interesting insight that it's that graduate and postgraduate education that's often the portal for getting these high-skilled people in. I was talking recently to the graduate admissions director at George Mason University, our local one, in computer science. And he said that they've had an 80% drop in the last year of overseas applicants for their graduate program in computer science, which I think is a great, great loss for our country. But I was also intrigued and pleased by, putting, all of you had great suggestions. Mr. Neufeld, you're talking about the specific 4. Number 1 was turning an H-1B into a true merit-based visa system. A couple of things I'd love for you to answer on that. Number 1 is I know there will be pushback from many of my friends in the Democratic caucus about people are going to be left out of certain countries. I specifically would imagine that this Congressional Black Caucus will say, what does that mean for sub-Saharan Africa? Are we only be getting people from Germany and Switzerland and England? Are we going to be missing people from other countries who would love to come here? Number 2, if you're basing it on compensation, what do you do with the differential compensations from different countries? Because I imagine somebody getting to Nigeria is going to make different money than somebody working in Switzerland. And also, with no offense to my brother-in-law, who's a Wall Street finance bro, those people make an awful lot of money, but I don't really want them here from other countries. How do you put together a thoughtful, merit-based plan that answers the obvious objections we're going to get?
We're going to tell your brother-in-law.
Thanks so much for the question. I think there's basically 2 challenges with designing a merit-based system that will require serious thought. One is both to make what are the things that we want that are actually the right metric for who's going to be benefiting America the most. I think you raised some reasons why salary is not the ideal or the perfect metric. And it might not fully capture all of the spillover benefits that we might care about. But the other thing that I think needs to be taken into account is also the incentives that get created. And this is why one huge advantage that I think something like compensation has is that it's very difficult to game in the way that an education requirement can be, for example. If you create a target that is a ticket into the United States, then people can just target that particular feature. Compensation is much harder to game, and I do think it's probably it's not exactly the spillover benefit, but it's one of the best proxies that we have for it. I do think that the concerns around different regional different prices in different regions matters a lot, and I've written before about how you could create an age adjustment based on regional price parity to account for this. I think another thing that's very important that some of my panelists up here have mentioned is that younger workers are very beneficial in the long run because they have more working years and their total contribution is much higher. And so I also think you could make an adjustment for age as well. So I think of compensation not as the end-all be-all, but it's something that is objective and very difficult to game.
I'll also make a comment, too, on, for example, recruiting folks from sub-Saharan Africa. The concern is, actually, I've read a number of times that the African immigrants are actually the highest educated of the ones that we bring. One more thought. The Office of Talent Assessment, I really like that, and maybe Congressman Schweikert and I can work together on that because Chairman Schweikert is going to go be governor. And it may take us a while to get it done. But I would like to make sure that we don't make that a target of a future DOGE. So often things like Office of Talent Assessment were the first things to go in this administration. We got to construct it in a way that people really see the value of it. So, and with that, my time's up. I'll yield back to Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly going to miss you. Oh, yeah. And indeed, I know, I think about it every time I see him. And indeed, it is good to see you, Dr. Holtzik. And I have to say, you said you're one of the favorite people. I don't know. I sort of picked up my step when I saw you here at the table when I came in. I can just tell you, one thing I like about you is that you always kind of just keep it straight. And I was struck by your comment that our 4th and 5th grade kids are not proficient in math or reading. I have stricken from my talking points about how great Wisconsin is that we had the first kindergarten in the United States, because that's obsolete at this point. We all know that birth through 3 is where it's at. And after that, we're opening up kindergarten doors and we're remediating immediately. And so, I just hear from this panel in a lot of ways, immigration, yes, a high-skilled immigration, get some teenagers in here. But in the meantime, to the extent that people are having children, we shouldn't throw the ones away that we have. And I mean, would you agree that we need to start formal education a long time before age 6?
Yes. I think there's a lot of evidence on that, on the benefits of not just early childhood education, but the key is sustained efforts beginning earlier.
Yes.
Having an early childhood program and then stopping, you lose all those benefits very
Like
quickly.
Head Start, for example. I mean,
Doesn't work.
We got to have publicly funded education. And would also help with the child care crisis. We want women to participate in the workforce, and it's hard for them to do by trying to finance their own care. But anyway, that's a digression from the main topic to some extent. I'd like to know more about the H-1B visas, where it now costs $100,000 to get one. Can you explain that to me really quickly? It was something that surprised me. Mr. Jones.
So last September, there was a proclamation that announced that there would be a $100,000 fee for the entry of new H-1Bs. And so importantly, this applies only to people who are outside of the country. So this does not apply to international students, for example. So for the 85,000 capped H-1Bs, I suspect those visas will still all be issued. But there's also these uncapped H-1Bs. These are the visas that are going to universities, our government labs, and other research organizations. And that if they're trying to recruit the best professor from Oxford or Cambridge or wherever around the world, that international recruitment pipeline is essentially over because $100,000 can't justify bringing in those people.
Okay, so Dr. Pardue, you made a point that I found a little concerning. You said that our aging population, being a boomer and all, that the entitlement payments and spending were driving our deficits, and we're spending $5 on the elderly and only $1 on children. If we were, in fact, to spend more money on the kids, how would what kind of argument could we levy about adding to the deficit to have childhood education because of the long-term impact that we're seeking now to upgrade our workforce?
Sure, and thank you very much for the question, because I think that's an incredibly important point, which is the fact that over time, spending on children actually reduces our deficit, which is the fact that if we invest in education, in healthcare, in nutrition, in kids, they become more productive adults. They are less likely to rely on public healthcare programs, they're less likely to rely on other government benefits, and they contribute more in taxes through their higher earnings. And so if we take a long-term view of the government debt and their deficits, over the long term, those investments in children actually pay off over time. And so they don't add to the deficit over the long term.
You will be quoted on that, just so you know.
I'm happy to.
All of you all will be quoted on that. I have been recently talking to teachers who feel like they're in a crisis situation because they feel like they're getting kids who are, by the time they get them, they get them in 6th grade and they can't read. And so they become disciplinary problems. And, you know, it's somebody's fault that they can't read and they're in the 6th grade. Probably not theirs. So thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Oh, fine, turn on my mic. Who have questions? So Senator Hansen.
I just had one more question to Mr. Neufeld. I mentioned in my opening remarks that other countries have created new programs to attract talented students and researchers who would have previously chosen to come to the United States in a clear effort to capitalize on the Trump administration's attacks on universities, its cuts to research, and truly reckless immigration policies. How could other countries, particularly China, benefit from the Trump administration's policies that deter skilled students and researchers from coming to the U.S.? And what should the U.S. instead do to attract and retain these students and researchers?
Yeah, so over the course of even just the last decades, a lot of countries have seen our general complacency around this retention as a huge opportunity. We know that in the last 10 years, both Germany and Australia have seen a share of the OECD international students.
Right.
They've captured a much larger share than they used to, while the U.S. has basically stayed flat in how many of the international students who are traveling to OECD countries where they're ending up. That is exacerbated very much right now. We've seen that international enrollment at U.S. universities in the last, just in the last year, has declined by over 15%. Visa issuances for F1 student visas has declined by over 30% over the summer. And so I think these should all be setting off alarm bells for people who are concerned about the long-term attractiveness of the United States. I think there's a lot we could be doing to improve retention. Maybe the single easiest thing is to establish policy certainty so that international students can make decisions knowing that they can complete their programs. But then having predictability about getting visas, getting work visas after they've graduated would significantly increase their retention.
And are there things that China is doing or could be doing that we should be concerned about?
Yes. So China has historically, as you know, been a net emigration country.
Right.
They've tended to lose talent. They've made a concerted effort to reverse that, and they've had a lot of success, most famously through the 1,000 Talents program, but also its more mysterious successor program called Qiming. But they've started shifting their attention after their success at getting people who have origins in China to return. They've shifted their attention to people who don't have origins in China. In 2021, President Xi announced this goal that China should be competitive for global talent by 2035, and they've started to make changes to become attractive.
Yeah.
They have rising incomes. They have this new K visa program. The new 5-year plan announces additional changes to their immigration program, and we should be taking all of those things quite seriously.
Thank you very much.
Lagging question.
Dr. Schweikert, thank you very much. Yeah, Dr. Pardue, I love you're going through all the statistics, and one of the things you keep coming up with is that we need people to work longer, that retiring 65 or 60 doesn't work. In fact, they talk about all the different countries that are now tying retirement age to life expectancy, which I think is really interesting. And yet you also talk about the congestion effects, the fact that we old people are not getting out of the way. And it's holding back all the young people that really want to like run for Congress. I remember in Switzerland, they said the retirement age was 65 because they literally wanted people to get out of the way, because otherwise the young people were ill. How do we balance that? This notion that we need to work longer, but we also need to make sure the young people are not stuck in a low-paying job because people don't retire.
I think that's an incredibly important question because it lays out that tension very nicely. And I want to point out, first of all, that older Americans living longer and working longer is a good thing. Older workers have firm-specific knowledge. They are more productive, and firms' revealed preference, the fact that they keep them on, is a revelation that they still are productive members of the company. And so that's the tension, which is how do we capture all of this knowledge and productivity that older workers have while still allowing younger workers to move up the job ladder? And we do that by raising dynamism in this country. This is happening because the reduced business dynamism, the startup rate falling 30% over the past 40 years, doesn't provide those opportunities for younger workers to find new career spots. And one way that we can raise business dynamism is through high-skilled immigration and raising the startup rate and doing all of that sort of stuff. And so what we can do is we can capture all of that productivity that older workers have and that knowledge, while at the same time giving younger workers those opportunities through increased dynamism.
Thank you very much. Mr. DiMartino, I was giving Mr. Neufeld a hard time about my finance bro brother-in-law. You modified his thing a little bit, saying not their overseas compensation, but based on salary offer, what they're actually worth in the U.S. marketplace.
Yes, because that's really what we care about, right? It's not about their past, but their future. And in fact, you mentioned the point before about sub-Saharan Africa and the country of origin, right? If you do compensation-based, actually, if you do compensation-based salary ranking of H-1Bs, you get a lot more country of origin diversity than the current system. Out of all new H-1B visas, 50% go to people from India. If you were to do salary-based compensation, that share would go down. It would still be the largest country of origin, but that share would go down and the share of everybody else would actually go up. And that is because, the reason many firms actually prefer people from specific countries or many industries or benefit from the H-1B program, it's not because they just want cheap labor, it's because of the visa system that keeps specifically Indians in the visa backlog for much longer, right? If you're from India, I don't know if you're aware, but the wait time for an employment-based green card is, if you apply today, is perpetual. You will die waiting. If you're a physician, from India, you will never be able to become an American. Unless maybe you have children and then they sponsor you, you have to wait 21 years. That's really the only way. And many people argue in Congress, I believe, that the solution is we should just treat people equally by country of origin. But if you just treat people equally, then you just rate everybody else's wait times to 20 years, which is still unacceptable, right, to wait 20 years. The real solution is we need to expand high-skilled immigration. We need to select better, right? We need to select people based on compensation, not people who are just middle-wage workers.
And Mr. Neufeld had said, just expand the number of green cards to get rid of the 21-year wait. Right?
That would be the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
You could also shift, right? Remember, for example, there's EB3. You can shift them towards the EB2. You can shift family visas. A lot of people talk about the diversity lottery, and I know that that's like a popular program on the Democratic side of the aisle. However, when you think about recruiting immigrants, even if you wanted to keep a system that gives people opportunity from other parts of the world, wouldn't it be fairer to say you can come here if you attain certain skills? Everybody in the world can learn English. Everybody in the world can try to seek an education, apply for a job. But not everybody in the world can win the lottery or appear a sibling in the US to sponsor them, right? So it's not only better for America's economy, it's also fairer to people all over the world.
Yeah. Mr. Neufeld, one more question. You talked about the visa restrictions, that the PhD has to stay in the university rather than move into the private sector. I'd never heard that before. Can you expand on why that is and how we fix it?
Yes. So this is largely a function of what Mr. DiMartino was mentioning, which is the fact that Indians and Chinese have incredibly long wait times in order to get permanent residence. Permanent residence, when they get to the green card, they can change their job, they can go anywhere they want, they're not tied to their employer. But before that, many of them know that their status in the country is dependent on their access to H-1Bs. And if they can't win the H-1B lottery, they might try to enter the H-1B lottery. Their fallback option is those cap-exempt H-1Bs, which are available to academia. And that means that many people who would want to take their ideas into the private sector end up settling for academia and feeling like they're locked there. And you can look at this when you look at the startup rates among US researchers and foreign-born researchers. The American startup rate is much higher because many of the immigrants researchers end up getting locked into academia where they're not allowed to take their ideas into the commercial sector.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Moore, do you have a second?
Thank you so much. Dr. Holtzeek, and I'm going to come back to you and dig a little bit deeper into your testimony. Here we are talking about the need for visas that support highly skilled workers. Here we are talking about admitting teenagers, high schoolers in so that we can capture their youth and productivity in order to compensate for our low birth weights. But you said that illegal immigration absolutely is a problem, but you've said that there's no evidence that immigrants displace native workers or lowers their wages. Matter of fact, it pushes their wages up. And I know, coming from Wisconsin, even though I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin is an agricultural state, that our farmers have come down to Milwaukee to sit us down in a fancy restaurant, you know, with their produce to explain to us how we're just killing them on immigration policy. So how do we square this circle of wanting high-skilled workers, and yet, you know, we're saying that we have limited number of visas, so that we ought to focus all of them on higher skilled people? What happens to those lower skilled workers, and do we not need them?
So as a general proposition, you never pick all of one thing and nothing and zero of the other in economics. That 100% and zero are never the right answer. You're going to need a combination of skills in the labor force at any point in time, and there are going to be opportunities for both. So, you know, the very simple message in my written testimony is, let's make sure we take care of native-born Americans and give them the skills to go into the labor market and compete. And they have clear incentives to acquire more skills and make more money. That's a very substantial part of the story. The next question is, how then do we decide on the number and composition of immigrants? And that's something that I think we're going the wrong direction in the number. Fertility dictates otherwise. And we don't have, well, historically, we haven't even tried to identify the mix on economic grounds, and I think we should. We've done very well without even trying. Let's try a little bit and see what we get. And then you get into the debate we're hearing, which is how do we correctly identify skill? But remember, we're probably also going to want to allow some lower skilled workers into the country as well. So my approach has always been, don't worry too much about the high skilled, because both of these schemes are going to work in the main. I don't worry about that. Advanced resume reading would probably do it. You look at the resume, you got a PhD, 5 years of work experience, speaks English, they'll be fine. It's for the others. We all know people who had terrible high school records, don't look good on paper, but they are the best colleague you've ever had. For them, you need a market-based approach where they can show their worth in the market. So if they can find an employer that will sponsor them, give them a 3-year visa or something like that, come to the U.S., remain employed, get another 3 years, remain employed. You've now proven you are valuable in the U.S. labor market, regardless of what you look like on paper, admit for permanent residence. I mean, something like that has to be in the mix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. And then immigrant myself, it's a very interesting topic to me. I came here almost 26 years ago with one suitcase, young adventures, and that's how a lot of Americans came. But I've noticed a lot of, interesting and not great trends including with immigration. We always had immigration for jobs and opportunities. We now created a system where we have a lot of immigration for welfare. And as you know very well, our debt is reaching 40 trillion. So we're on the way to have big problems, and welfare system is collapsing, and truly we don't even have ability to support the promised benefits, and we have to do more serious reforms. But I have a question for you. And maybe you can kind of comment on that. There are a lot of changes happen in labor market, and really, I don't think governments adjusted, including state government. I used to be state senator. We, always talk to my former colleagues on education committee and workforce, how we're adjusting to new demands and skills with AI and automation that will be, demanded from, different type of skills. So what are your thoughts about, even if we look at the immigration system, and we always want the best and brightest come into our country, contribute, and really create real GDP and work hard. That's what America is about. Not even necessarily the best degrees, but really people that want to pursue happiness and work very hard, but a lot of knowledge and skills. When I came here, no one cared about my fancy MBA from Ukraine. My first job was a bank teller, and then people told me, I cannot, afford to live on $8 an hour. So I started, people told me CPAs are smart, so I became a CPA and had all kinds of jobs, and now I ended up here. But tell me what you think, and maybe Mr. DiMartino, I'll start with you, and then we can ask if other people. How do you think we can think of our immigration system that we have this best and brightest coming into the country, but also adjusting to the skills that AI and automation and everything will demand, and it's going to be a different labor market?
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. And I'm an immigrant myself as well from a socialist country, from Venezuela, so I relate a lot. And look, what I would say is I share your concern, and I think that that's the paramount concern here, which is there is some immigration for welfare. And the reason is that we have a very extensive family-based migration system. If you look at my estimates, and this is on my testimony too, even though the average immigrant is a net contributor to the federal budget, about half of immigrants, or more actually, are net drains. It's just that there's a minority of immigrants who are just really big additions. And the reason is, despite there being for legal immigrants a 5-year ban on receiving welfare once they become permanent residents, after that, and when they become Americans, they get on Medicaid, they receive Medicare, Social Security. In fact, half of the negative fiscal impact of immigrants who are negative is driven just by Medicaid. If we just excluded non-citizens from Medicaid and tax credits, we solve the fiscal negative impacts of immigrants, right? So that's on the policy side on eligibility. And on selecting immigrants, I trust in the market much more. I think if you say, look, this is the number of immigrants we can compromise on in Congress. We have 1 million green cards, 300,000 of them go to immediate relatives of Americans. The rest we're going to say, let the market decide. Employers can bid for them. You can have wage ranking. You can have a point system. There's different ways. You can have them all in between and have them happen. You have part of it employer sponsorship, part through points, which is what Canada, Australia, and New Zealand do. And they do it very successfully until recently, at least in Canada.
Okay, well, thank you. It seems like we have a challenge with enforcement because supposedly, when my mother-in-law came here, she's a German immigrant. She actually used to have to go register at the post office periodically, that, where she lives, and you really had lots of paperwork to do, but it's changing quite a bit. Dr. Perdue and Dr. Holtzik, and if you want to, any of you want to add anything on this issue? So you have any thoughts on that?
All I would say is that both in our immigration system and domestically, you spoke about our domestic education issues, it's about building systems that are flexible and resilient to changing definitions of who is the best and the brightest. And I think something like a system that lets the market speak from...
But how is AI and automation that will be new demands? How is that a fact in how we should look at immigration systems? Shouldn't have a fact, because we need to look at our domestic labor markets, but shouldn't an immigration system also, if we want to benefit this innovative industries, it's going to be changing? Wouldn't it be a fact in also?
Oh, sure. I think one thing, especially with AI, and Chairman Schweikert spoke about this, that this next decade is going to be all about the race for talent, identifying that top talent. Right now it's about dominance in AI, developing AI models, and we can build resilience in our economy by specifically poaching the top AI talent. I think that's an important aspect.
I think my time.
Just one footnote to this, which is there's often this discussion which has the flavor of immigration is the problem with the entitlement programs, or immigration will be the solution to the entitlement programs. The entitlement funding problem we have came from a native-born fertility boom. It has nothing to do with immigration or native-born births. It's the structure of the programs. We need to fix the programs and make them survivable over the long term, and there's no way around that.
Well, it's reckless spending and no oversight from Congress, so it's really, truly fraudulent overspending. That's really not even demographics, but thank you.
Thank you. All right, my favorite portion of the program, when they're all done and now I get to hang out with you. It's one of the few great joys of playing chairman for a while. Okay, I have dozens of questions, but I first want to go through a concept, and I'm going to ask all of you. If I came to you tomorrow and said, look, we have some research papers that say the current design of H-1s does have some wage suppression because it's employer-sponsored, and therefore this visa is functionally sponsored and owned by the employer. How do I have some of this population come in and that talent be much more portable in the economy? At least our side, our joint economic economists on the Republican side, we've been playing with models looking at, does that portability minimize, actually remove the wage suppression? And then I would do, as a couple of you have spoken about, then actually move to a talent, scoring system. So do I get rid of H-1s, say I want more Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, others who've gone sort of a point type system, and say I want to maximize, this is on the skills-based visas. Here's our shortages in the economy. We can tell the shortage by the movement of wages. Is that a more rational model? If those of us who are absolutely terrified and fixated on the scale of our growing debt, as of today, we're borrowing $87,500 a second. You do realize if I do the 12-month calendar, we borrowed $2.7 trillion in the last 12 months. It's demographics and interest. Dr. Perdue, let's start at one end and go to the other. Tell me why a true point-based talent model is not a better substitution than employer-sponsored model.
Well, why it is not, or why it
I'm not. I'm giving you an open-ended.
Yeah. I mean, so there's sort of two things, which is one, the devil is a little bit in the details with the point system, which is how you actually develop it. I think over-indexing on any aspect has its drawbacks. Over-indexing on education, for instance, can produce degree mills in other countries that can then reduce the signal of those points. So I think the devil is in the details with the points-based system.
But don't we already have some of that already happening in the H-1 qualifications? You saw the scandals last year of some of the. It was actually in Bangalore that we had fake resumes, fake degrees.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a lesson to learn in the design of any formal point system. But I would also say why it is that the value of H-1B visas is that they facilitate productive matches between employers and employees that would not otherwise occur. And when you allow portability, you raise the productivity of those employer-employee matches. And increased productivity will lead to increased revenues, which will lead to higher tax payments that reduce the deficit. And so that's sort of the main basis of
and
the
that's what the academic articles say of the portability.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Dublin?
Well, obviously, portability is good, and we can actually just work even within the current H-1B system to make it more portable, right? It's already technically portable. Actually, thousands of H-1B workers change jobs every year, but it is a lower rate than the general workforce, and in part is because of the permanent residency process. So I think if you actually fixed the permanent residency process, the H-1B system would almost fix itself. Think about it. Why would a company that wants a permanent worker sponsor a temporary visa? Because the permanent visa takes years to obtain. So they take the temporary visa in the meantime.
So your argument, it's the distortion within temporary to permanent, and because this is so hard, that's why you do
That's exactly why we have so much demand for H-1Bs. And that is also the lottery design within the demand is what allows the outsourcing companies that bring in low productivity workers.
Would you get rid of the lottery mechanism?
I would just do a wage ranking adjusted by age, like Mr. Neufeld talked about, because you want younger people. Because if these people are going to stay here, forever in America, you'd rather have a 30-year-old making $150K than a 50-year-old, because they have 20 extra years to contribute paying taxes and 20 later years to receive Social Security.
We're going to come back and talk more about that. Dr. Holtz-Eakin.
So point number one is that these are lifetime decisions that people are making, and policy certainty is very important. And no policy is absolutely certain, but legislation is way better than executive action. And so I'm pleased that you're considering legislation on this front to give people some notion of how the program will work. Then the issue becomes, how big can you make the box legislatively. And if you just have to work within the confines of the current H-1B, portability is a good thing to do. Allowing the spouses to work would be a good thing to do. A sort of mating means we get a lot of skilled workers. Then the question is, do you want to push the box wider and have more skill-based immigration that you can use and deploy in the economy?
Look, you spoke to this, Doctor, a couple of months ago. Look, we have needs for agriculture. We have needs for other types of specialty. What we do is, and the President Trump has actually said this, it's insane we educate populations and then send them home to compete with us.
Agreed.
But at least for part of this discussion, we're almost fixated on the talent-based side, because I've been in many ways hunting for where we actually have at least a commonality of vision. So maybe something that's executable in today's.
Like our DACA kids, for example.
Yeah, but so falling into those.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think legislating on this is a really good idea. How aggressive that legislation can be dictates just how broad you're going to make this. If you just want to fix the H-1B program, that's what's feasible, do it. I think that's a start. But I think there's room for more economically based immigration in the U.S. with some sort of talent score in there to rank people.
Mr. Newfield.
I agree with what everyone else has said, and I just wanted to give you two additional points for your consideration. The first is one thing that experiences with points-based systems in Canada and the UK have learned. They both started their point systems without having a role of employer sponsorship, and they realized that the immigrants that they were coming without having job matches they had a higher unemployment, their integration into the economy was slower, and so they both added into their point system a role for points if you already had a job offer, and that improved the outcomes.
Okay, let me ask again. So point system, but you got a bonus if you actually had an employment commitment.
That's what they've learned, yes. And it seems like once they included that bonus, that resolved much of their problems. And so I think having a role for employer sponsorship still should be a part of the answer, even if you still want to have a better selection mechanism in evaluating the different employers who are trying to get visas. And the second point for consideration is, I think one thing some of my panelists have talked about is that if you're thinking about the fiscal effects, there's both the direct impact of having additional workers, and there's a productivity effect. And I'm skeptical that focusing on the shortages is going to be the best proxy for maximizing the benefits of the productivity effect in the long term. What might be a shortage now might not be a shortage in the future. A shortage might not be the kind of thing that's going to lead to solving a shortage might not be the kind of thing that's going to lead to innovation.
So when you do your mental exercise in regards to productivity effect, are you actually also looking at changes within generalized wages and wage growth as part of that productivity effect?
I think in the long run though the wage growth is most wage growth is going to be driven in the long run by the productivity effect.
But as we often see, sometimes when we get a roll and are flattening of productivity, sometimes the new wage benchmarking, though, remains. So it's the lag effect. It's a little geeky, but Dr. Holtz-Eakin.
I want to emphasize the importance of the productivity and long-run growth for the following reason. What's been left out, it falls to me always to be the skunk at the garden party, but this is all fiscal good news for the federal government. But a big influx of people is a fiscal challenge for states and localities. Lots of immigrants mean more police, more fire, housing, schools. And so the initial impacts are very hard sometimes in the localities. That's a bad news story, and that's one of the reasons it's hard to talk about this in some circumstances. Can I just finish?
Finish, and then
Over time, the bigger are the economic impacts. That is everything for states and localities. Their base is a rapidly growing economy. That's what they benefit from.
Look, you have the PhD, I do not. But I would argue if our current demographic trends, look, I'm in what would have been considered a high-growth state, yet I'm now hovering, Arizona's hovering, what, 2%? We're closing schools. So what happened when some of the way we used to look at growth was growth on top of growth? Now I have a society that basically is at zero population growth. Maybe we actually do have more capacity than we've thought about in past years, than we would have had in past years where we had generalized growth.
The thing I'm concerned about, you're probably right. You're the one who's going to be governor, not me. The other things being the same, like we've adjusted to the fact that we don't have as many kids, so we've closed some schools. We have the property tax base, and we've adjusted the rates to be in line to finance that. And now a whole bunch of people show up, and I'm paying property taxes to expand that school that we just closed, and then we have to rehire some firefighters and police. That's part of the assimilation challenge, and that's part of the fiscal challenge that doesn't show up on the federal books and is often not thought about in doing the federal reforms.
I need to think about that a little bit more because I've been looking also at my demographic seesaw. If I'm moving much older, I now need adult daycare, but I may not need juvenile daycare. And do I actually start to balance my seesaw? So look, you and I could whiteboard this and have some fun with it.
Yes, but this is why high-skilled immigration is such a boon, because it's not just about the federal level being positive. At the state level, college-educated immigrants are a fiscal positive because, it's true they consume public services at the state level more than at the federal level, but, they also pay higher income taxes. They also pay much more in sales tax. They pay more in property tax. And so high-skilled immigration does pay for itself. It's low-skilled immigration that is really a challenge at the state and federal level too, really.
Okay, you've built a model, and I hope others will actually play for this both on the left and the right. So you've built a model, and I can put in my age, my talent, populations, and get calculations, right?
Well, so far what it has is about 50 different policies that are very widely discussed. Everything from deportations, legalization, this visa, this other visa, shifting this green card, creating this new visa, and then you can see the impact of that.
So if I can-
But if you want the by age and education level, it's on my written testimony, and I also have a sheet here that I can give you.
I'm sort of cheating here because I looked at your sheet, but this is more for the communal discussion.
Yes.
So let's say I'm sitting in front of your models. Give me what maximizes benefit to U.S. budget, and then what adjustments do I make to maximize wage growth? I mean, where is my sweet spot for, hey, here's what we do for the fact we're borrowing $7.5 billion today. But over here, I also need wage growth. Right. And often the discussion, the fear of immigration, particularly talent-based immigration, is wage suppression. Right. But we know if it's talent-based, if properly done, actually does just the opposite. It actually raises productivity and general wage growth. Where's my sweet spot according to your models?
Yes, so when economists think about the impact of immigration on wages, it's not that immigrants lower or raise wages, it's that we have relative wages, right? Physicians don't compete with construction workers. If we suddenly dropped 1 million construction workers in the United States, that's not going to affect negatively the wages of physicians, right? If anything, it's going to be positive. They're going to have more patients. And that's exactly what happens with high-skilled. Imagine we bring in suddenly a large number of high-skilled immigrants to America. That's actually going to raise demand for low-skilled labor in this country. It's going to raise the wages of hairdressers, of construction workers, of where we tend to think low-paid occupation. But they will compete with physicians in America. That's absolutely true. However, when we think of high-skilled immigrants, you're right, there are productivity effects. Maybe they create a new product. It's not just about physicians. It's AI, it's entrepreneurs, it's startups. America is one of the few countries without a startup visa, where you can't come and create a business without you investing your own money, right? We have the treaty trader and treaty investor visa, the E2, not with every country, it should be expanded. But for the countries that we do, it has to be your own money. You can't just be a startup founder that goes to Silicon Valley and gets VC funding, which is actually the most productive, right? So the sweet spot is you want to bring in people who are entrepreneurs, either they are startup founders, you want to bring in people who are college educated, ideally graduate, and people who are under 50 years old. That's really it.
Okay, for our panel here, anything that's burning in your souls that you've wanted to share that we haven't been able to ask? In that case, I'm going to bring this to a close. Please be prepared. For the next week or so, we may send you written questions and ask you to send it back to us, which will be made part of the public record. And with that, thank you for everyone participating. I care a lot about this subject. We have spent years and years and years in my office and also with our joint economic team trying to build what we call the unified theory of trying to stabilize U.S. debt and economic growth and opportunity. And as we build that unified theory, the fact of the matter is immigration, particularly talent, I can't make any of the other numbers work without fixing this module of it. It's just, it turns out it's the cornerstone of making all the other adoptions of technology, new processes, deregulation work. We need to start to think about this as a unified theory of economics. And with that, the hearing's closed. Thank you for your participation.